My name's Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. So, what's the line? What is the deal?
We will not regret the past. We will shut the door.
Okay. I want you to remember this. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. That's from the Big Book, written by Bill Wilson when he had about 3.5 years sobriety in 1939. You guys remember that? Because this is going to be something about that. There's going to be a bunch of things having to do with that. Talk about the ninth step, sort of, but I'll probably forget that line. So every once in a while I'll say, what's that line? What is this about? And you'll tell me and you'll remind me. I'm 77 years. I think I'm 77. I was thinking about it. I think I'm 77 years old. I'm not 100% sure. Has anybody here forgets how old they are? Am I the only one? How many people here are in their 70s, late 70s? How old are you? My shoes are 72. You're like a child to me. I'm it. This is it. Unbelievable. So one of the things that happens because of age, and I'm not sure whether it's good. I actually think it's a good thing. I sort of like it. Is you forget a lot of stuff. You go into rooms to get something, you forget why you're in the room. You just forget stuff. One of the things that happens is, because I speak around, I go places and conventions. One of the things that happens is you can't plan. You cannot plan what you're going to say. You can try to plan what you're going to say. Well, I'm going to say this, I'm going to talk about that, or whatever it is. But by the time you get up to the podium, whatever, your mind is like blank. So whatever comes out, it's got to come from some other place, but it ain't coming from me. Okay. And I sort of like it that way. I'm sort of used to it. And I have a relationship with God, and I trust Him and the Holy Spirit and stuff like that. He seems to be taking care of me in that respect. So I'm just going to tell you some personal things about my life. I was thinking about this. Remember the Desiderata? You guys know what the Desiderata is? I never memorized that deal. But there's this line, the Desiderata, about listening to older people who surrender their years. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the line is. I can't remember it. But I'm going to do somehow that line in the Big Book. I've been thinking about that line for a while, and because it's. I think I'm going to talk about. That line means more than what it says, and there's a lot of stuff that has to do with that. It's like a throw. As you grow older, I don't know what to tell you. You see things differently. Your perspective changes. I'm in my 46th year of sobriety, and I'm going to tell you something. My perspective changes. Bill Wilson wrote the Big Book in 1939. I got sober reading the Big Book and the 12 and 12. And I read it, and I love the Big Book and the 12 and 12. Love Bill Wilson. I was all Bill Wilson as Bill sees it, and like I took to this like a duck takes the water. And by the time I was 10 years sober, I was sucking on the muzzle of a gun. I didn't drink, sponsoring everything inside, I was doing everything. I'm not one of these guys, I left AA or something. I'm in AA and I'm dying. And in 46 years, I've met hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people who where I was at. I'm telling you, 15 years, 20 years sobriety, dry as the bone, depressed, going through all sorts of hard times. I've met many, many people at 5, 10, 15, 20 years sobriety who were into the AA thing. You don't stay sober for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 30 years going to meetings and you're not into AA. But I met many people who at 5, 10, 15, 20 years drank, ended up drinking. Some of them while they're going to meetings, they end up drinking or end up depressed. So I want you to get this deal in your mind. So I got this book called The Big Book that I worshiped. You got to watch out who you worship. Worshiping is a very interesting thing, I had a God as I understood him, because that's the deal in A, right? You ever read Appendix 2? It's the first step. Don't worry about the God thing so much. It's whatever you think he is. The problem is, I'm just going to throw this out there just for the heck of it, then I'll go on to one point. The problem is with the God as you understand them, for me, this is all me, all personal me. It has nothing to do with you guys, unless you want it to have something to do with you guys, or unless one day it has something to do with you guys. Because it may have nothing to do with you guys now, but in 20 years, it might have something to do with you. So the problem with the God as I understood him is because by the time I had 10 years, I didn't know what the problem was. The problem was I didn't understand them. What happens when you got 10 years and you know all about AA and you memorize the big book and you speak all that? What happens when you got 10 years and you do all the steps and everything like that, all with the God thing and everything? You're not an atheist. You're not an agnostic. What happens when you got 10 years and you have a problem? You know what the problem is. And somehow something happens where you realize what the problem is you don't understand them. Now, if you've ever never been there, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't understand. Sometimes you got to be there. Because if you can't understand them, you can't have a relationship with them. See, the sixth step says, and this is going to be about the ninth step, but it's also going to be about the sixth step and the seventh step. It's going to be about the 10th. It's going to be about all the steps, and I'll explain that in a second. See, the problem is if you don't understand, in the sixth step, it says that's the step that separates the men from the boys, the adults from the children. There's some sort of separation. Now, that's just not me. That's Bill Wilson at 15 years. This is a step that separates out people. And because I think somewhere around 15 years, you probably realize there's a lot of people that end up drinking. There's a lot of people that end up making 2 years and 3 years and 5 years. That you can sort of like when a newcomer comes in, he's all jittery and nervous, and he's got that mind that's going 2,000 miles per hour, and you know that the only way he's going to make it is if he somehow gets a sponsor, goes to the meeting, does this thing mechanically, does the third step on his knees, does the fourth step, does the fifth step. You're not pushing the God thing so much. Just do the steps. Go to the meetings. Get involved in the fellowship. Do it by the numbers. He's probably going to make it for a while. But then you run into these guys that have 5 years and they drink, and they're coming back. 10 years and they drink, and they're coming back. 20 years and they drink, they come back. And you're sitting there saying, what do I tell this guy? Because I know about the failure. Yeah, I'm going to come back this time. I'm really going to do a good fourth step. He said, well, didn't you do the fourth step? He said, yeah, it didn't seem to work, right? He says, I'm going to really go to meetings. Well, weren't you going to meetings? He says, yeah, it didn't work. You left them, There's like a piece missing. And you want to tell him, do the steps. That's what you want to tell him, right? You want to tell him, get a spot. You want to tell him what you would tell a newcomer. Well, just do the steps again. Do them again. Go to another rehab. Well, this is the 16th rehab I went to. What are you going to learn there that you didn't know? There's something missing, but you're not sure what's missing. And if you ever get to that point in your life where you're got time and you're still going to meetings, but you're depressed or you're lonely or you're anxious and you don't know what the problem is, it's a hell of a position to be in for several reasons. First of all, you really don't know what the answer is because you're going to meetings and you're sponsoring people. And the second thing that's a problem is because of the false pride of having 10 or 15 or 20 years, you don't tell anybody because you wouldn't know what to tell them. You go to a group and you're the guy with the longest time in the group. You go to a group and all your sponsees are there. You go to a group and you're doing the steps. I'm doing the steps here. So, what am I going to do? Tell you guys like I want to kill myself, or something? The pride stops you. Like a newcomer, the great thing about being a newcomer is you can say anything as a newcomer. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm in love with the chicken, and 5 guys come up to you and say, and they tell you, hey, we're in love with chickens too. Come on, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. You can't say anything wrong as a newcomer. But as a guy with time, you got all that ego and pride and stuff, sort of that. So you're sort of like out there in the wilderness. If you got 10 or 15 years, it's not like being a newcomer. And and I've met thousands of men and women that are in that position. I mean, we know what to do with somebody who's got 3 days or 44 days or 110 days or something like that. They haven't gone through the stuff. Somebody with 15 years who's depressed, 20 years. So you got Bill Wilson. He's got 3.5 years. And he writes this book called The Big Book, Not Putting It Down. And in that book, it has, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. which is sort of like 8th and 9th step stuff. You know what I mean? And so you think, and that sounds pretty good. I'm not going to regret the past. I wish to shut the door on it, whatever the hell. But you don't really know what that means. I mean, it sounds good. I don't regret the past, but you don't really know what it means, you know? And so here's what happens. Bill Wilson gets to 23 years sobriety, around 20, what was it, 23 or 30? It was in 1959. You've got that 1959. What's the difference between 1959 and 1935? That's 24. When he's got 24 years sobriety, he writes a completely different thing. It's called The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. And I'm not. It's a 4-page thing. You really need to read it. And in this 4-page thing, I'm going to hit the high points. He says, "I'm depressed." This is the guy. He's not like he's not going to meetings. It's not like he forgot how to do the 4th step. It's not like he doesn't know how to do the steps. This is our fearless leader, you know? And this is the guy. This is Mr. AA. And which I have to applaud him. A lot of people think I'm putting Bill Wilson down. He writes it down. He says, "I was hit by depression. It was killing me. My life is over. I don't know what the problem is." And he says, I've noticed that, like me, there's a lot of old timers. I guess an old timer in A would be 23 years or something like. I hit with depression. I've met a lot of old timers. He calls them oldsters that have passed the booze test. You see, you guys have all passed the booze test. The guy with 144 days passed the booze test. I got 46 years. I passed the booze test. A lot of you guys have passed the booze test, okay? Yeah, isn't that what AA is all about? That's what they hand out medallions for. Don't drink and go to meetings. You go to every meeting in the United States of America. All these don't drink and don't go to meetings, pass the booze test. But they're not emotionally sober. So he's basically saying, I have met a lot of guys that are my age that have done this thing, have worked everything, and they're not emotionally sober. And he says a couple of interesting things. He says, I'm trying. So he's at 23 or 24 years. And Bill Wilson is trying to find out what the answer is. And the reason he's trying to find out the answer because he's out of answers. Because it ain't the big book about Alcoholics Anonymous. Because the guy who wrote the big book about Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't have a clue. And I know he doesn't have a clue because in the thing, who read it? You guys read it, right? It says, I don't have a clue. As a matter of fact, he says it better than that. He says, I got it all wrong. How does that make you feel? The guy, you're reading this book, you're reading as Bill sees it, you're doing all this stuff, you're basing meetings on it, it's all about Bill, I'm a friend of Bill's and everything, and the guy who happens to be Bill says, I got it all wrong. You say, oh, well, thanks for sharing, Bill. That's based my whole life on your writings, and you're like a whack job ready to drink, And that's what he says, I got it all wrong. He says, I'm going down the tubes and I know what the problem is. He says, I know it has this is what he says. He says, I know that this has something to do with the St. Francis prayer, which, by the way, was a prayer written by St. Francis. That's the first clue. First clue. It's a clue. You can choose whatever God you want in AA. Choose the God of your own understanding. Any God you want. But whatever God you choose has consequences. I'm just telling you, there are consequences to what you choose. And in the 6th step, it says that the way the 6th step works, according to a well-loved clergyman. There's a hint there. Hint. St. Francis, hint. Well-loved clergyman, hint. It's a lot of hints in the big book that people don't pick up on. According to a well-loved clergyman, the one who was done the 6th step was the one who's trying to get rid of every impediment in his life so he can grow in the image and likeness of their creator. To grow in the image of God. So if you don't know who God is, and you just know there's a God, he could be the tree, it could be nature, it could be this, It's just hard to have a relationship with the tree. You know, it's hard to have a relationship with the horse, you know, with the tree, with the thing. You know, if you don't have when you get to the end of the steps and you've done all the steps, and now you got 15 or 20 or 25 or 23 years like Bill Wilson, and it's not working because what's happened is the steps have gotten you to a certain point where you beaten you pass the booze test, but you find that there's still something. That's the scary thing. When you find you pass the booze test, when you're depressed and you're still anxious and you're still worried and you feel lonely, then there's something missing and you don't know what it is because you may go to a lot. It is true. Intensive work with alcoholics will ensure physical sobriety. And you may be working with so many sponsees and doing so much stuff and so much activity that you don't drink, but that doesn't necessarily stop the self-pity. Doesn't necessarily stop, you know, feeling sorry for yourself, stop the loneliness, stop all the anxiety. It doesn't necessarily stop that stuff. So you become like Bill Wilson. Man, thank God he wrote that thing so I don't feel so alone because it happened to me at 10 years. It happens to other people at 20 years. It's like it's going all when somehow the steps and the big book and the 12 and 12 and all the stuff you're doing mechanically stop working. And you think you're doing it all, and you are doing it all. And in a sense, you're sort of resting on the steps, resting on your laurels, resting on the big book. The meetings will keep you sober. Your sponsor will keep you sober. The big book will keep you sober. But what happens when none of that stuff is helping you in the emotional end? And you don't even know how to explain it to your group. You don't even know how to say, well, I got 20, I'm having problems. I don't know what the problem is. And Bill didn't know what the problem is. And then he says in the deal, now remember, this is 24. He writes a big book at 3.5 years. And he said, what's that thing I will not regret the past, the wish to come. Who knows how many other lines he wrote that you just think are gospel. They're true that, I don't know, are they true? Because 24 years later, he's saying, I got it all wrong. 24 years later, all of a sudden you're regretting. What happens when you're 24 years sober and there are things you did in the past and it's just keeping you up at night and you're regretting it? Does that mean you didn't do the ninth step? What happens if you did the ninth step and you're still regretting? You know? You can't totally shut the door. Does that mean you're not doing this thing right? Or does that mean that at 3.5 years, Bill Wilson felt that happened, and all of a sudden at 24 years, it hasn't happened? The steps haven't gotten rid of it. Does that mean you're getting it wrong or right or whatever? I mean, what other things? You see, because sometimes what happens, my sponsor used to say, well, a man with experience meets a man with money. The man with experience will walk away with the money, and the man with money will walk away with an experience. And what I guess he's trying to say is that as life goes on and you get older, and you get wiser, hopefully, and you go through all the shit with lives, the steps, you see things in the book that you've never seen before. You see lines in the book that you've never seen before. Sometimes stuff is happening to you and you don't know why it's happening. What happens is your experiences with people and with life and who you're listening to changes your idea of who you are and what you are and that kind of stuff. And the truth is, if you don't somehow get this thing right, you not only can drink it, you can either drink again, or even worse, you can not drink and just live a miserable life, a life of quiet desperation, as they say. And that's what happened to me at 10 years. Happened to me at 10 years. I know somebody else that happened to him at 35 years. I know a guy who drank after 22 years. It happens all over the place, you know. If you listen to people, they'll tell their story about what happened to them. And then Bill says the following. He says, I got it all wrong. I put too much dependence on people, places, things, the circumstances of my life, and on Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I'm not bullshitting you about this. At 24 years, the guy wrote all the books and everything like that, all about AA, built it up real big, wanted to do the hospitals, got millions of people following him and everything like that. He said, I got it all wrong. You ladies were reading that thing. You actually got that deal that I was talking about. And he said, I got it all wrong. I put too much dependence on AA. You know what would happen to me? Well, it hasn't happened to me because I've been doing it for years for some reason. You know what happens if you go in an A room and you say, you know, the problem with A is you can't put you can't put too much dependence on it. They shoot you, they crucify you. You know what I mean? This is all about A cruises A. And you said, listen, A. What if I told you that A is not the answer? It's not. It's not the answer. AA is not the AA. There is one who has, you know what's the answer? There's one who has all power. That one is God that you find in that. That's the absolute answer. You know why they wrote the book? They wrote the book. This is a mere code of morals, better philosophy of life. The stuff would have helped us a long time ago. It's not the answer. That's why we wrote this book, because we had to find a power that would solve all our problems, not just the drinking problem. And of course, we have to talk about God. The answer is God. Burn the idea it's God. You know, don't rely on people, places, and things. God will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. You have to put your real reliance on God. It's all about God, 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 God. And AA, at least the first 5 or 10 years, or most of the meetings, is don't worry about the God thing. Let's go light. Let's go light on the God thing, because you'll fill newcomers. So what happens when you go light on the God thing and you just say, well, I believe God, I know God. You know, basically, we're all alcoholics, so we all want people to accept us. So we know the book says atheism, agnosticism, that's got to be abandoned, right? So we know we're going to come in here and say, we're going to pray, we're going to hold hands, we're going to say we believe in God. But what happens when you say all that stuff so you can fit in? Because if alcoholics want to do anything, they want to fit in. You know what I mean? What happens when you hold hands and you say all the God stuff and everything, but you don't really believe in God because you really don't know who God is, because the God you have at 20 years is the same God you had at 6 months. You don't understand him. You don't know him. He's not the central factor of your life. It's all about half measures of lukewarm and something you say. You give him lips. I'll tell you what happens. What happens is you become Bill Wilson. You become Russell Spatz. You become somebody who's empty. You know, because you've done all the steps, but you know what the problem is? Somehow, for some reason, you've managed to evade or avoid the God thing by just doing all the steps and thinking, well, I've done AA. And then eventually you drink or you commit suicide or you do something like that. And I'm just telling you what I know and what I've seen. So in 1980, years after that, 1980, the last one that was published, they write a book called Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. And it's all about Dr. Bob. It's all about the people around Dr. Bob. Remember our co-founder? And Dr. Bob wasn't famous. Dr. Bob didn't write a lot of books. Dr. Bob was a doctor in Akron, Ohio. He helped thousands and thousands of people. Very well respected. Dr. Bob was the one who said to Bill, the last words he said to him before he died, he said, Bill, let's not screw this thing up. Keep it simple. Dr. Bob's the guy who said the books we find absolutely essential: 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, and Sermon on the Mount, and the Book of James. Dr. Bob was the guy who said, first things first means seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, all things will be added unto you. That's all in the book that was written in 1980 about Dr. Bob and what they were doing the first. You know, the first AA meeting was Dr. Bob putting his foot on the rung of the dining room chair and reading Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5, 6, and 7. That was Dr. Bob. He said, you want to know about AA? Read the Bible. That was Dr. Bob. I know I'm exaggerating when I say nobody knows this. There are some people that know it. I talk about it all the time. You read Dr. Bob, the Good Old Timers, and all of a sudden you see a completely different AA than the AA you're going to. Bill Wilson's going down the tubes at 24 years. Dr. Bob is solid as a son of a bitch. You know, he wasn't worried about big crowds or anything like that. He was just, you know why? Because the central fact of his life was God. That was the deal. He focused on that deal, on that rock. You know what I mean? He was steady. And when you say to somebody, that's called an exhortation. When you say to somebody, let's not screw this thing up, let's keep it simple, that's not patting on the back and saying you're doing a good job. It's just not. What it is, it's a combination of an encouragement with a warning. I'm encouraging you to do something because I'm warning you you're getting into trouble. Because Dr. Bob could clearly see. Bill writes this thing. I have it on my email. If you ever get my email, he says, Dr. Bob was far humbler than I ever was. Far humbler than I ever was. Bill Wilson, in the end, relied on Dr. Bob if you wanted to talk to somebody who was steady. Because for Dr. Bob, it wasn't about the steps. It was about a right relationship with God. In his case, a right relationship with the Lord. That's what Dr. Bob was about. And so and that's just factual. In fact, you can read the book. You read the book. Read the books. You know what I mean? There will come a time in every alcoholic's life where he'll have no defense against the first drink. His only defense is going to have to come from God. And if you don't understand him at that point, you don't have a right relationship with him, you're going to be in trouble. And Bill knew enough to understand that, you know? Bob was the one who was totally focused on the God thing. Bill was the one who went up to Henrietta Sutherland and said, I don't think we should talk so much about God or religion. And Henrietta said to Bill, this is what she said to him, it's in our literature. He said, Bill, if you don't talk about God, that's the only reason you're sober. You got to stop worrying about pleasing alcoholics. That's what we do in here. We try to talk in such a way that people in AA will like us. We don't want people leaving AA saying, you know, that guy Russell and Sheriff, you know, we want everybody to love us because that's part and parcel of the disease. That's part of the dis-ease, the desire to have nobody reject you, the lack of courage, no courage whatsoever, so you blend in. You whore yourself out to the world. That's why it says we never apologize for God. All men of faith have courage. They trust that God. Instead, they let him demonstrate through their testimony what he's done for them in their lives. And once they begin to outgrow fear, that's the difference between having fear and having a life where you stop. What does it say? We lose fear of people. What does it mean to lose fear of people? It means you stop worrying about whether people like you or not. So you can talk faster at meetings because you don't run it through the filter. Like, can I say this? Can I say that? Can I do all that? You have what you have is called the new freedom. Worrying about what people think about you is like not the new freedom. It's what you had before you even started drinking. When you were 13 years old, you worried about what people. When you were 15 years old, you had alcoholism. You know, you don't get alcoholism by drinking. You get alcohol. You're born with alcoholism. You know, your life is tough. Life is difficult. You hate high school. You hate You hate these things. You're always worried. You're always anxious about what do people think about me, what they won't think about me, and all that sort of stuff. You want to match. You want to write the right clothes. You spend money you don't have to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. It's like life is fucking horrible. You know what I mean? And how, you know something? It gets worse. It gets worse as you grow up, and then you discover alcohol. And you drink alcohol. Because no woman, no man, no suit of clothes, no nothing works quite as well, quite as fast as alcohol. And then you go down to the bitter end, and you learn that alcohol is only a symptom. There's a lot of symptoms of this disease. You know, gossiping is a symptom of this disease because you feel like such a piece of shit that somehow, some way, if I can talk to you about what a jerk this guy is, and you agree with me, by talking about somebody else behind their back and telling them they're a jerk, it makes me feel superior. And so all I want to do is talk bad shit about other people and think bad stuff about other people because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel better. And so I can't shut my mouth. All I can say is bad crap about other people and talk bad and think bad things about other people. And so the alcoholism goes on after we stop drinking. You just don't have the anesthesia. You know, you're just not using the drugs, but it goes on and on and on and on. And how are you going to solve that problem? You got to find, as it says, you got to find the power that'll solve all your problems, not just the drinking problem, because if all you solve the drinking problem, and then when you solve the drinking problem and you're collecting all these medallions, you think you've solved the problem and you haven't even come close to the problem. You're now discovering what the problem is as you go on. You say, man, I'm not. All of a sudden, this insanity thing of the second step makes sense because you're not only discovering that you had a drinking problem, you're discovering that you're crazy. And you don't even know what the deal is. You know, whatever it is that you look for. You're lost and that kind of thing. So what is that? So what happened? One of the things that happens to me, and I don't know whether it's good or bad, I'm just telling you it happens to me, is you know how the steps, when I used to teach the steps or do the steps or got in there and I did the steps, how we all do the steps, I think of them as like separate things. Don't you think of them as separate things? There's the first step that has to be done 100%. And there's the second step. Then there's the third step. And this is how you do the third. Then there's the fourth step. Well, I'm going to tell you, it's like you got these little estates. Like, see these fences? It's like the steps are like little countries surrounded by, you move from the first step, then you go to the second step. Then what do you want? I'm on the third step. I'm doing the fourth step. They're completely separate things. But what happens is you get older and you're doing the steps over and over and over and over again, over and over and over again, 10 steps and everything like that, you start living with what I would call a turned over life. I mean, you become so used to doing the steps, so used to dealing with resentments, so used to dealing with what happens is they bleed into each other. I don't know. It's hard to, they sort of bleed. The humility of 6 and 7 bleeds into 9, which bleeds into 10. It's not like a separate thing. It's about a way of life that demands rigorous honesty. And it's not like you're doing the steps. You're just living your life a certain way, which sort of has the same effect of the steps because you're doing the steps, but it's not the step. Because you become your personality becomes transformed into a different deal. So in the 7th step, I'm going to go over to the 7th step, which happens through the power of God. That's where the transformation happens. It doesn't happen because you're smart. Smart doesn't do it. As a matter of fact, stupid will work better. You know? Well, I love the line in the Apostle Paul says, when he asks God to remove, one of the things that happens in the Apostle Paul, one of the great things, and I love him because I know he was an addict, and he wrote 13 books of the Bible. He's like the penultimate Christian. One of the things he's an addict because he said, I'm a wretched man. I'm the chief of sinners. Who's going to save me from this body of death? You know what I mean? He said, I found God, but but I'm nuts. I'm crazy. Who's going to save me? And he says, and when he talks about, how we talk about, I'm not drinking. God has done this. He says that. And then he says this, but somehow, some way, even though I got all this stuff, and this is the line he says, to keep me from becoming conceited, to keep me from coming full of myself. Thinking I'm so great. God gave me, this is where I start understanding. I start going from somebody that didn't understand God, where now I start understanding God because the coloring book, you guys know what a coloring book is? It's an outline, but it doesn't make any sense until you fill in the colors. Where I start coloring things in. I see who God is. This is what the Apostle Paul says. You know who the Apostle Paul is? Apostle Paul is the guy that St. Francis followed. He's the guy that well-loved clergyman followed. He's the guy that Dr. Bob followed. He's the guy that Sam Shoemaker followed. He's the guy, you don't have to make him a guy. You can borrow one. You know what I mean? There happens to be, if you look around, you can actually buy. And this is what he says about God. He says, to keep me from becoming full of myself. He gave me a thorn in my flesh, something that's just killing it, And I asked him 3 times to remove the thorn. You got a thorn going on? You got a problem going on? You got something that's fine? He says, this is what God says. He says, I'm not going to take it away from you. You're going to be dealing with this until the day of your life. You're going to be dealing with stuff until the day you die. He says, because this is to keep you from becoming conceited, because when you are weak, I am strong. As a matter of fact, my power is greater than your weakness. And all of a sudden, you look back in your life and you say, how did I get to AA? Because I was crushed. It wasn't even a decision. I was so crushed, 1 week before going to AA where I thought I still had some power, you know what I mean? I ain't going there. All of a sudden, you're crushed. And somehow it's a good idea to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And as you go along in life, you keep on getting you're hitting these mini bottoms all the time, mini crushes, and all of a sudden now you're doing you're doing this because that's how we grow. As soon as we get weak and things get really bad, we call up the sponsor, we call up somebody, we do the deal, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden things get better because we do things we weren't going to do. In other words, the crushing is the weakness is absolutely necessary, but we don't want to be weak. We want to be strong and in control. Because we're alcoholics. And we don't like the God thing. You know how I know we don't like the God thing? Because I've been to over 40,000 meetings. And almost every meeting I've gone to, some guy raised his hand and says, I didn't like the God thing. So I'm getting the feeling that alcoholics don't like the God thing. You understand? You ever get that feeling that the God thing is a problem? I hear people in AA say, God thing was a problem for me. So if you have thousands of people going to AA and the majority of people saying the God is a problem for me, you're probably going to come away with a group of people where the underlying philosophy is don't talk so much about God. Let's talk about step 4. Let's talk about fear. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. Well, what happens if just as you suppose, like Bill Wilson found out, what happens if God is the only answer? What happens if you get to the end of this thing and you've got everything except the God thing? You got a God of your understanding, but you don't understand him and you don't really have a relationship with him. What happens when you look at God in the mirror and he looks just like you? What happens when your God looks a little bit like you? Sort of really understands you. He sort of likes you. You know what I mean? He'd never hurt you. He'd never chastise you. He just wants to lift you. What happens when God looks a little bit like you? Oh, what's that thing in the big book? We got to stop playing God. Maybe God ain't like you. Maybe God's perfect. What does perfection look like, you know? So how are you going to solve that problem? So let me get to the deal. The humility. So the 7th step says, we're going to somehow peel into the 9th step. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to get there. It says the 7th step is all about humility. And then it says this, humility is the basis of all the steps. Did you know that? Humility is the basis of every step has to do with humility. What does humility look like? I don't know. I think it looks like when I got up one day in front of 200 people, a big shot, you know what I mean? Like me, a lawyer and everything. Division chief, used to try murder cases in front of 200 people and stood up and walked to the front of the room, that long walk, to pick up a white chip. Everybody's looking at me and I'm basically saying, I need help. I need help. Let me tell you something. I put people in jail for life. I tried people to put them in the electric chair and enjoyed it. You know what I mean? You know, to get up in front of a bunch of people and saying, I need help. I knew I got 5 days, I got 10 years. That's humility, you know? So unless we have some degree of humility, you know how humble it is to go up to somebody. And I said to some guy, how do you get a sponsor? He said, well, you got to ask somebody. I said, you got to ask somebody? I don't know how you guys feel about it. I've had guys come up to me and says, I've been thinking about getting a sponsor. I said, yeah. He said, well, I don't really know what I'm going to do. You know, they talked for 20 minutes about getting a sponsor. I said, listen, let me put you out of your misery. Are you asking me to be your sponsor? Well, I saw, what I mean, that kind of thing. It's the toughest thing in the world to ask somebody to be a sponsor. I got guys that I sponsor, lots of guys. They call me up to see how I'm doing. Oh, you're calling? Oh, once every 6 years, you call me up to see when you still have a sponsor. You don't really want it. You don't want me to die, do you? You don't want to have to go through the process of actually asking another human being, do you? That warms the cockles of my heart. You know what I mean? So the bottom line, there's a lot of things we have to do that requires humility that we don't have. But then it says this: unless we acquire more of that precious commodity, we will never be truly happy. So what does humility look like when you got 46 years? And I can only talk about a lot. So I got to somehow breeze through this real quick. Okay. I when I was 21, 22 years old or something like that, I met this girl and I was one of these guys hanging around bars looking for women. Women were my drug of choice. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, I told my sponsor once at an A meeting, I said, look at that blonde in the front row, because I was still looking. I was treating A like a bar. I was just looking at the gals, And he said, look at the gal in front of that blonde. He says, Russ, what kind of booze did you drink? I said, I drank, top shelf scotch. He says, you see that blonde in the front? He says, yeah, I see it. He says, for you, that's a bottle of scotch with legs. It's a bottle of scotch with legs. Many guys have figured that out after a while, after they slipped a couple of times. But the bottom line is, that was my drug of choice. To get some woman to adore me and like me, I feel like and walk in, if she was real good looking, guys are looking at me. That was my job, because you need something to feel okay about yourself. Because basically deep down inside, you're a piece of crap. That's why when you're driving your car and lathering up, every once in a while you tell yourself you're a piece of shit, you might as well kill yourself. That crap that goes on in your brain. But the bottom line is, it's all alcoholism. It's all this sickness, and the bottom line is, it's all the disease. It's all the symptoms. And so when I met this girl, I said, oh, man, if I only had if only, or yes, but if I only had her, I'd be okay. Why can't I get her? And so I insinuate I'm going to make this short. I'm going to shorten It's a long thing. I insinuate myself in this gal's life. I change my whole life around, so that she'll like me and everything. I get married to her. She has a baby. We have a son. We got a beautiful house on Miami Beach on Golf. I'm working for the state attorney's office, doing the prosecution thing and everything like that. My shit don't stink. I'm brilliant. You know what I mean? I'm drinking. And then after about a year or two, she was, I don't know what to tell you. And she wasn't doing it for me anymore. You know what I mean? So I'm going to the bars and I'm drinking till 3 o'clock in the morning, looking at the blondes, brunettes, and rednecks. Never cheated on my wife. I'm very proud of myself for that. I would just leave her at home with the kid, and I'd roll in at 3 o'clock in the morning after drinking all night, looking at the blondes and saying to myself, if I only had that one, I'd be okay. I could get that one if I'd be okay. And feeling sorry for myself, but being very proud of myself that I never cheated on my wife, but she didn't really have a husband. She had a guy who was actually looking. You know what I mean? And then one day she says to me after 5 years, she says, come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. Somehow I had made the mistake of hooking up with a gal who had self-esteem. Big mistake on my part, but anyway, I don't know where she got that. But and I left saying I realized what happened was I drove 3 blocks down the street, and then I thought about what she said. If you come home, 12 words, if you come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. I mean, I'm not a stupid guy. I mean, departmental honors in mathematics, going for my PhD in algebraic topology. Come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. And I say to myself this, I said, what the hell do you mean by that? Didn't make any sense to me, and and what I realize now is that when an alcoholic hears something he doesn't like, it confuses him. You get confused. But I had remembered it. I went to the bar at 4:30 in the afternoon. You always get to the bar early. And I ordered my one drink, a double scotch. I whack it down, you know what I mean? And I say to my friend Doug Hartman, my drinking buddy, I said, listen, I got to leave because Ronnie told me if I come home drunk one time, she's going to leave me. And he puts his arm around me and says, Russ, you're the greatest guy in the world. Everybody loves you. You are the greatest guy in the world. Everybody loves you. Your wife adores you. She thinks you're the greatest thing in the world. She's fantastic. She loves you. She'll never leave you. And I'm thinking, well, that's what I was thinking. You know what I mean? So I stay at the bar and I get drunk and all that sort of stuff. And I end up getting kicked out of the house, and she files for divorce. And she says, because she doesn't really want to, she says, why don't we go to a marriage counselor? I go to a marriage counselor with her. Marriage counselor asks her 3 questions. What are the 3 things you want to change about Russell? She says something. I'm not even concentrating on it because I'm already out of that deal, and I have a date with the redhead. You know what I mean? And I just don't want to be pulled back in. He asked me, what are the things you want to change about Ronnie? And I said, I just want to date other women. To the mother of my child. I asked my sponsor was once, what does it mean when it says selfishness, self-centeredness? That's the root of our trouble. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, we step on the toes of others. He retaliates, seemingly without provocation, but with self-over and riot. I said, and I said, what does that mean? He says, Russell, what it means is you don't give a fuck about anybody except yourself. Who says that in front of a woman? Who says that in front of a woman? Even what kind of piece of shit says that in front of a woman who's the mother of a child who you've treated like crap for 5 years? Who says, I just want to date other women? You know who says that? A bum says that. And I was a bum in a 3-piece suit. I was a piece of crap. So now what does that have to do with the nightstand? I did, something, here's the deal. I did a night step with my wife. She had cancer. They had found the breast cancer. And when I had about 3 or 4 or 5 or about 2 or 3 years or something like that, whenever I did it, I went up there and I did a night step with her. And I admitted who I was and what I was. And she actually said to me, she says, I thought I was the problem. Because I wasn't good enough to, keep you interested. I said, you were never the problem. I was the problem. I was a liar. I was a cheater. I was a bum, and and that was the problem. And if you had stayed, if you hadn't kicked me out, we would have never been able to talk this way because I would have just dragged you down. I said this was all on me. I never even thought that she would think she was the problem. And I was surprised. So I did my night step. She got remarried to a fraternity bride. We were friendly, it was not, all right. But here's the problem, though. So now I'm 20 years sober, 25 years sober. And every once in a while I think about my wife, my first wife. I'm married 46 years to I call her my current wife to keep her on her toes. Here's the deal. I'm now at that point in my life, where I'm sober for 20 years, and every once in a while I think of my wife and what I did to her, and how I hurt her, and how I hurt my family, and everything like that. This is after doing nice stuff, and I feel like my heart is breaking. You know why? Because I regret what I did to her. I regret, and it's never gone away. Now, it doesn't ruin my life. I don't necessarily feel sort of like guilty about it, but I do in a sense feel, because there are some things that you can't fix, ever fix. And you look back at them. And you know what I realized about that? I realized, you know, I a long time ago, I used to say, like most people say, hey, I'm spiritual, not religious. Let me tell you something. I'm anything but spiritual. I know who, you see, you know what I know? My regret for what I've done for her, which I hope I have for the rest of my life, it's like the thorn in the flesh. You know what I know? I know who I am. I'm not a spiritual man. You know, I'm a bum. I'm a liar. I'm a cheater. And anything that's good about me or decent about me that you see or may be attractive is only the Lord working in my life. It's not me. I have people come up to me. They come up to me. I don't know, you may believe this or not. And they say, I don't want to make your head big, you know, but you really saved my life, or you really did this to me, or you really that. When you said this, they said this to me. And I never, all I ever say to them is I say, thank you very much. I appreciate it. But what I want to say to them, I said, let me tell you something. There's nothing you can say about me that's going to make my head bigger. I said, you have no idea. And it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. So God has allowed me to have this regret that's in my heart for how I treated my wife, you know, and it peels over to how I treat my wife now. I kind of, me and my wife, where I'll tell you, it keeps me from becoming fully. And no, look, I got an ego, but listen, I know who I am. I'm not spiritual. Let me tell you something. I'm a material man in a material world. And if I don't focus on a God of my understanding, that I understand who he is and what he is, you understand what I'm saying? I will turn back into the person I was when I said I just want to date other women. Do you understand? So quite frankly, regret for me, for something you've done in the past, and knowing who you are and what you could become again, is the greatest thing that could happen to you. What kind of man would you think I was if I said to you, well, I said that, but you know, it doesn't bother me anymore? What if I really felt, what if it didn't bother me? What if I didn't even think about it? Oh, it was no big deal. It happened. I made my 9th step. It's all okay. Would you trust me with anything as an individual? What kind of human being would I be? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Recovery inspiration is sitting right there waiting for you. Rocketed.org AA speaker recordings brings real voices and real stories straight to your ears. Subscribe now so you never miss a new recording dropping. Keep that motivation on tap and help spread the word. Hit subscribe and let recovery find you every single day.